Roleplay games got kind of messed up recently, didn't they? Wonder if we'll be able to convince somebody to play the game we've always wanted to play. There are some big changes in the role-playing game community. Dungeons & Dragons is sort of imploding right now. Wizards of the Coast have finally answered the eternal DM's question. What will it take to get my party to play a different game other than 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons? Well, now we know, I guess. It's the entire destruction of everything I love. And look, if you want to send a message to Wizards of the Coast, one of the ways to take action is to play different games and make the marketplace bigger for those games. So if you fancy trying something a little different, here are 5 great alternatives to Dungeons & Dragons that you might be able to convince your table to play. I've even done some of the work for you. Each one of these will come with their own custom pitch. Pitch number 1. Guys, want to hear a scary story? With Call of Cthulhu. Okay, so if you're looking to take this opportunity to dip your toe into a different kind of system, I think Call of Cthulhu might be just what you're looking for. This game is actually the most popular Western game in Japan, beating out D&D pretty handily, thanks to a lot of Japanese women who simply can't get enough of tentacles. The entire nation paying for one painting made by a single artist. Beautiful. But those ladies aren't wrong about Call of Cthulhu. The tentacles, we'll talk about that in some other video. Call of Cthulhu is a title from Chaosium, and it is based in the Lovecraft mythos, which you'll know as that setting made by the guy who had a cat with a name that will get this channel instantly demonetized if I say it. But Chaosium have done a good job of picking out the good from the bad. Namely, they skirted around everything that had a racial slur in the title, which did reduce the amount of content that they had to work with. But the game is good, and the setting has evolved past the, good old days. By default, it is set in 1920s New England. Wait, don't leave. This isn't some musty historical game where we all put on transatlantic accents, pretend that we're in the Great Gatsby and say swell a lot. Okay, maybe there's a little bit of that, but players take on the role of investigators who are trying to uncover the horrors of what lies beyond. Players come together not for adventure, but to solve mysteries like the case of the missing stars. Oh my god, why are the stars disappearing? Is something eating them? Is it here in this room with me right now? I just wanted to do a book report for my English degree. What the hell is that? Players can play the role of an elderly professor of etymology with a hat, or a slick private detective with a hat, or a cunning rum smuggler with a hat. Hats were big back then, okay? I don't know, what can I say? Now, don't get me wrong, that's not to say that if you fancy some spell slinging, you can't do that. Of course you can! Eerie cosmic horror settings have always had wizards and magic. Yeah, you probably shouldn't do that though. It's an occupation that tends to burn through your character's sanity pretty fast. Speaking of sanity, boy, this game is all about going cartoonishly mad. Sanity is an important aspect of living in the 1920s, due mainly to the availability of hardcore street drugs at your local pharmacist. A fact that you'll be especially grateful for when you find yourself at the bottom of an ancient structure that appears to date from way before the birth of mankind itself, and also seems to be taking the laws of physics as more of a gentle suggestion than a firm rule. Was that a noise back there? Whew, it's hard to tell with all this non-Euclidean geometry, and oh my god, what is that thing? We are but ants! Ants in the dirt! How come the Hardy Boys never run into this stuff? Yeah, didn't I mention that? The monsters in this setting are so horrifying, so scary, that even being in their presence is bad for your health. There's no level 20 equivalent here where the world falls in supplication in front of the party. The closest feeling you'll get to that is when you bring along a Beretta 1918 or just develop delusional narcissism. The game is less combat oriented and more oriented. Think mystery story and a short game. Characters are fragile and combat tends to be quick and brutal. Luckily, the game mechanics support this type of horror-based storytelling very well. Call of Cthulhu operates on a D100 system. This means that you'll be rolling 2 D10s and trying to remember which one you designated as the 10s. But once you've figured that out, it's all very simple. You just roll the dice and check to see if you've rolled a number lower than your skill threshold. It has some additional subsystems, like a bespoke chase mechanic for when you really gotta fly that hot air balloon out of there, but Cthulhu has other ideas. And they are cool systems, but honestly, this game can be run very lightly, with most rolling being the occasional opposed skill check, which is good because most of the time the players will die the moment they open the wrong door, which, believe me, is a lot funner than it sounds. Especially for the DM. For the players, the gameplay is all about figuring out why that is the wrong door to open. Usually it's because it says, "Don't enter" on the front of the door. God, just follow instructions, people. You can probably tell that I love this game a lot, and I've been playing it off and on for almost 2 decades now. If you like horror, then you probably owe it to your table to give this a shot, if even as a short game or a one-shot. There's not a lot to learn, and it's worth it. Bonus, this is also one of those games where I would actually recommend the pre-written adventures, especially if you're going to use handouts and props. There's nothing quite like hiding clues in old newspaper articles and having the players read them. Now that's punk. Pitch number 2. Let's just keep playing Dungeons and Dragons, but better. AKA Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Okay, so you've heard this game suggested before. I promise I will not belabor the point. Pathfinder 2.0 makes for an excellent replacement system for D&D, if you're looking for that. If your table really enjoys Dungeons and Dragons and wants a very similar experience, but arguably with an improvement of mechanics, then this game is the game to bring to the table. Actually, fun fact, Critical Role started as a Pathfinder game before they converted to 5th edition for streaming purposes. Because there was indeed a time when Matt Mercer needed to rely on someone else's brand recognition. Pathfinder is pretty notable for being one of the few games that is able to actually compete with D&D on the same level. And for a while there, during the dark days of 4th edition, Pathfinder was seen widely as more Dungeons and Dragons than the Dungeons and Dragons. There is a culture of moving on to Pathfinder when things get bad for D&D is my point, so why change things now? This game should be super familiar to D&D players. You pick your ancestry, your background, your class, and you can play as a goblin. A goblin! Pathfinder is slightly more complicated, but that gives the system a lot more flexibility. Pathfinder's feat system means the classes are super customizable, but because the game relies on the D20 system, walking into this game from D&D should be pretty smooth. This is a classic experience and not dull at all. Pitch number 3. You son of a bitch, I'm in. Blades in the Dark. Oh, who wants to play Ocean's 11? Me! Only if I get to play as George Clooney. Well, too bad, that's not this game. Well, not entirely anyway. It's more like Ocean's 11 by way of Peaky Blinders having been mugged in an alley by Dishonored. Blades in the Dark is a heist game dedicated to enabling your table to tell stories about performing elaborate heists or mugging people in the back of alleyways. Some games just have more glamour than others. But stay thine hand, board role player. This isn't like all those heist games that you played in D&D. You know, the ones where the DM has excitedly revealed that the party have to steal some magical MacGuffin. They've carefully laid out an elaborate map depicting some fantasy compound filled with complicated patrol paths, deadly traps, important NPCs, and more points of interest than an Assassin's Creed game. Only for the players to then look at each other blankly, spend an entire session uncertainly constructing a poorly assembled, half-thought-out plan, and then when it comes time to execute, they just keep rolling stealth until they are inevitably caught by somebody, and then they just fireball everything. Yeah, That's not this game. This is built from the ground up to make a heist actually engaging for players. You know how in a heist movies, when you watch the actual heist take place, there's always a moment where something goes wrong. Like maybe the bank safe is made of an indestructible material, or the combination was changed earlier that day. And there's a brief second where all seems lost before George Clooney interrupts the narrative to say, luckily that day I had smuggled in a circus contortionist called Timmy Little who can open the safe from the inside. That wasn't a George Clooney. I don't know what voice that was. Anyway, you know how that always happens? Well, that's Blade in the Dark. It's all about those moments. It features an entire flashback mechanic that allows players to simply create their heist plans retroactively, making their characters appear hyper competent and preserving the self-esteem of the players. Why be clever in real life when your character can be clever for you? And it lets you get really imaginative. Like if you guys get into the vault and it turns out that it was filled with snakes, one of the player characters can just have a flashback to when they filled their pants with mongooses. All they gotta do is take a stress point and buy a bunch of mongooses retroactively, but it works. And here's the best bit. Are you ready for the best bit? It's actually fun. The game is easy to play, simple to learn, and has an incredible, evocative setting. You know the guy at your table who always wants to play a ninja or a rogue or a thief? He will love this game. But there is stuff here for everybody, especially the more politically minded role players out there. The base setting is a grim, gothic, Victorian one set in the city of Duskaval, a wretched hive of scum and villainy, where multiple factions are jostling for political control of the city. It's very sandboxy. Players build a shared criminal organization with its own character sheet and goons.
Hired goons?
This means there's never any risk of a player not feeling compelled by the central conflict of the campaign, or simply not having an investment in the success or failure of the party. Everybody is on board with getting money and power for their firm. Blades in the Dark is notable for being one of the few games where my table took a specific mechanic from this game and basically now use it for every single other game that we play. And this is the clock system, a very neat little system where the DM is able to track just how close to the wire everything is getting for the party. Multiple clocks mean multiple threats to the success of the party's goal and multiple obstacles for the party to overcome. One clock may represent the arrival of the police to the scene of the heist. Also, the building is on fire, so you'd best hurry. And uh-oh, that polar bear is breaking the bars on its cage. And hey, now there's a riot forming outside. And oh no, how long is it before the mushrooms kick in? And these are all going at different speeds and building up as a result of the successes, partial successes, and failures of the party's roles. This mechanic really ratchets up the tension as the party desperately attempt to complete their goals while spinning multiple plates before things blow up in their face. If you want to simulate a game of lots of close calls instead of simply a binary success or failure, then I'd recommend checking this system out, if only to seal the clocks, which seems appropriate for a heist game. Pitch number 4. I want to fight kobolds with necklaces made of human ears. With Shadow of the Demon Lord. Ever thought to yourself, boy, this game of Dungeons and Dragons doesn't have enough blood and guts. I want more blood and guts. Well, luckily, Shadows of the Demon Lord has those blood and guts which you've eagerly hungered for. Which, by the way, isn't normal. You should totally get checked out for the hunger. Shadow of the Demon Lord is to Dungeons and Dragons what those first 3 episodes of Gotham were. You know, before the Balloon Man episode came out and everybody stopped taking the show seriously. God, that is a weird reference. This is Dungeons and Dragons with grit, fear, and a little bit of self-loathing. Basically, my teenage years. Yes, there is indeed something crawling in my skin, and it's all because of those damn adults. I mean, Demon Lord. That's right, there is indeed a Demon Lord in this game, and players live within his shadow. Fancy that. The world faces an apocalypse. The Demon Lord rattles his cage seeking to end the cosmos, and DMs are given a number of different templates for how this world-ending event occurs. We're talking plagues, floods, famines, zombies, and giant demons. Woohoo, it's a smorgasbord of world-ending events. The end of the world context provides space for players to be heroes, but it feels more earned than simply expected because they're adventurers. This is a dark fantasy setting through and through. And as a game, it is much much more streamlined than D&D with a lot less rules overhead. It uses a D20 system, which means that all those expensive dice that you bought for D&D are still useful. Huh? Even those metal ones. Boy, they were expensive. It also plays pretty fast and loose, meaning that combat is quick and dirty without being particularly swingy. I have friends who have just lost all interest in D&D the moment they played this game because they find the system and vibes of this superior in every way. And I kinda get why. Characters start at level 0, which is always fun. Character creation consists of a few random rolls on some different tables and you're good to go. Which is good because I've only heard of one character actually surviving a full campaign from start to finish. Yeah, did I mention that this game is hard? Because it is. But that's all in keeping with the style. If you're looking for a game to represent something like Darkest Dungeon or Diablo, then baby, this is that sweet little number. And it has demons that worry you like a Huh? Pitch number 5. You guys want to roleplay like it's 1977? With the fantasy trip. So, some viewers might be fans of the Fighting Fantasy series by Ian Livingstone and Steve Jackson. You know the ones, they're the books where you choose your own adventures. You stumble your way through the Minotaur's Labyrinth, keeping one finger firmly planted on the previous page so that if you die, you can just skip right back and choose a different option. Well, guess what? The Fantasy Trip by Steve Jackson is wholly unrelated and authored by a completely different game designer who also happens to be called Steve Jackson and also happens to have written a couple of fighting fantasy books too. This is getting very confusing very fast. What DM made this adventure? They need to work on their NPC names. Fantasy Trip is a walk down memory lane, the game that could count as a member of the old school Renaissance genre. You know, the OSR that all those kids are banging on about. But it's not really a Renaissance game so much as simply old school. It's an OS game. The Fantasy Trip takes us back to a time when men were men, women wore chainmail bikinis, and Spain was not yet a democracy. This is a very raw game and kinda janky, but that only adds to its rugged Irish charm. It's not Irish, but it does give the impression like it'll steal something. The setting is pretty generic fantasy, to the extent that I've played through the game a bunch of times and I don't even know what the world is called. So basically it takes place in the same setting as D&D, aka whatever the DM wants to call their homebrew world. The game really shines in how much flexibility it gives players to act how they want, granting freedoms such as choosing a class. Will you be a mysterious and learned wizard, or a martial and strong hero, or that's basically it. Okay, so you get 2 choices there. Making a character doesn't come with a ton of traditional mechanical decisions. There's 3 stats: strength, dexterity, and IQ. That's one less stat than humans have humors, which, I mean, do we really need black bile anyway? But just because the stats are limited doesn't mean that the game is. Oh no. Players can go on classic traditional D&D-esque adventures like stealing a delicious pie from an orc in a dungeon. And there's a load of pre-written adventures set up just for stuff like that, and lots of talents and spells that players can learn that are focused on combat. But players can decide to do so much more. They can pick up professions like being a beekeeper, or being the only guy in the party that can read. The game has scope to tell all sorts of stories, not just those that take place in a dungeon. There's a lot of stories though that do take place in a dungeon, I'm not gonna lie. That's not to say there's not a lot of danger inherent in the game though. The system is designed so that your character can die in a very unfortunate fishing accident. Combat is dangerous and deadly. Characters are pretty fragile and weapons have the capacity to deal lots of damage. If you've ever watched Verhoeven's classic Flesh and Blood and said, "Boy, I wish I was there," then this is the game for you. And because this is old school, players aren't really given directed actions to do. Instead, they are expected to simply describe what they are doing, you know, using their imagination and stuff. And the 3d6 system that the game uses guarantees a silky smooth probability curve that will have most characters feeling pretty consistent and confident at the things that they are supposed to be good at, and not very good at the things they're not supposed to be good at. This means that it's rare for feel bad moments, like when the buff knight character can't lift a rock, but the weedy wizard tosses it like it's nothing. And hey, if you don't have anyone to actually play with, or you simply can't convince your table to go back to the days of the flared gene, then you'll be happy to hear that there's plenty of solo adventures made directly for the game. Not bad, huh? And this is only a tiny sample of alternative role-playing games to Dungeons & Dragons. So if you're interested in seeing more recommendations, DM advice, and coverage of the tabletop industry, then subscribe to the channel and pitch your favorite game in the comments below. If you're curious about why everyone is losing their minds over the OGL, by the way, then check out this video here. And a huge thanks to my patrons that make this channel possible, especially Sonic Bread and Crypto Kev. And I'll catch y'all next time. Bye-bye!